Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of our Day 1 and Beyond series. These series take you through various topics and activities related to building out on Oracle Cloud. We are hosted on Cloud Customer Connect, which is our Oracle community forum for customers and end users. You can create a free account there to join in discussions, post questions, and look for upcoming events on various topics. We should have a poll on the screen. There it is. If you could please answer this poll, we want to get an understanding of everyone's level of experience with cloud and Oracle Cloud infrastructure. This helps us in customizing our content for the upcoming sessions. So would really appreciate if you would take a few seconds to answer this poll. This session is being recorded and you'll be able to find the recording on Cloud Customer Connect. You can also find the recordings and slide deck PDFs of our previous sessions there. I'm Renu Bhatt, a TPM with the Customer Enablement team, and today I'm joined by Larry Bisley, Senior Manager, Technical Program Management, and Jason Cook, Master Principal Cloud Architect, also called as Resident Expert for these sessions. Joining us as experts are Anand Prasad, Cloud Architect, and Lynn Lewis, Senior Cloud Engineer here at Oracle. Today, we are going to talk about multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. Like always, a quick reminder to use the Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen for any questions throughout the session. And now I will hand it over to Larry.
Awesome. Thanks, Renu. Appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining. So this is going to be a fun topic. I know I like talking about multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, and this is why we brought Jason, because Jason, are you excited to talk about multi-cloud and hybrid cloud?
Yeah, this is going to be a fun topic today, and definitely one of the areas where we see a lot of movement in, cloud professions. So there's a lot of activities, a lot of things we get to talk about today. So this will be a good session.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, to get to the topics we're going to discover today. So what are the drivers for multi-cloud, common use cases, some multi-cloud services, drivers for hybrid cloud and edge, and common use cases, and then some Oracle services that we provide for this. So as we kind of progress through this, as Renu said, please feel free to throw some questions in the Q&A, and we'll try and grab this as we go through. But we do have a kind of a fun journey just to talk through this. So to start us off, we're gonna go into a poll for asking another question about cloud, because multi-cloud is a very vast piece at this point, at this day and age in tech. There's a lot of different clouds out there, a lot of different cloud vendors. What does it look like? What are you using? And something that at some point, you have to think about, why are you using that cloud? And that's some of the conversation that we're going to have today is, why, when, what, who, all of the common questions that you have. And as we're kind of seeing this progress, I see a lot of customers that are using OCI, which is fantastic, because that's, we're presenting this from Oracle. But, there's reasons why you potentially use other clouds. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. So I'll go ahead and, while this poll is running, so keep that running for just a little bit longer if anyone else wants to answer this. But this first piece here, we're going to talk about, this 98%. 98% is a great score on a math test or a physics exam. But Jason, what are we talking about 98% in this case?
Most customers I get the chance to talk to now are already using multiple clouds, right? If we would have had the same question, say 5-10 years ago, you probably are in one, maybe two, but anymore, you're probably in one of the big four, like we have in the poll there. You're in AWS, Azure, GCP, OCI. You might even be using one of the smaller ones for more specific use cases, like for human capital, HR. You might be into Workday. But anymore, all the customers I talk to now, they're already in multi-cloud. They already kind of started their journey a couple of years back, and now they're trying to figure out how to get the best out of all the clouds that they're currently leveraging.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing is getting the best out of what cloud. When you look at the clouds and how they're innovating, what they're putting out there, which cloud to use. And that's a question that you kind of have to look at from a business perspective. And one of the things that we talk about here is data sovereignty, data locality, cost optimization, something that I don't want to dive too much into, but it is still a crucial point of this. And this is one of the reasons why you look at multi-cloud. Oracle has a great database, and we'll talk about that as we kind of progress. But, all these points kind of come back to, at some point, you're going to be using multi-cloud. And I've talked to enough customers that when we have the conversation, it's not a question of if they're going to use multi-cloud, it's when are they going to use multi-cloud, because either you've acquired a company that has another cloud vendor, and if you look at it from a technical debt standpoint, is it the right move to migrate them to the cloud you're currently using, or just connect it up and say, all right, well, we can put some security and parameters around all of the clouds we have. And there's some similarities in how you kind of protect, defend, and do that approach for which deployment you're going to go with. So as we kind of move over to this, so some drivers for multi-cloud, and I talked about this a little bit, but Jason, what are some key drivers that you see when you're talking to customers?
Yeah, I'd say the three that are just common topics, especially in the past 12 months, is cost optimization, right? Lots of customers have moved and built workloads into the cloud. They built them with speed, got there quickly, but maybe didn't have time to optimize the workloads from a licensing standpoint, size, scalability. And they're kind of coming back around again to look at the workloads they've built and migrated and trying to figure out how can I optimize what I've already got out there. Best in breed, that's come up pretty often as well. Customers have preferences on the tools they like to use, right? Obviously, we've got a great database platform, but there's other options for the other services. Maybe you're a customer that likes to use Power BI for your visualizations because that's what your group is standardized on. And so they're trying to figure out, how do I take something from Azure and something from OCI and put them together so I can have that best of breed? The other one I see a bit about is around resiliency, especially around DR, which is a little of my background. Customers trying to figure out, how can I recover workloads from region to region? And the newer conversation I've been starting to have is, how can I recover a workload from one cloud to another, especially if I want to stay in that region and I want to be able to ride out maybe a service outage, but I don't want to move to another region?
Yeah, definitely. Just a reminder for everybody, if you can throw those questions in the Q&A, I'd appreciate it. But yeah, definitely a lot of good points there. And the cost optimization, I know it's one that customers they like to talk about, and then you get the engineers and they're like, hey, can we just build? We just want to build. But it's still a very crucial piece to have the cost optimization. One of the other pieces kind of talked about here is the vendor lock-in, and that's something that kind of drives for a multi-cloud. And there's a lot of services that are cross-cloud that will give you that capability not to have vendor lock-in. But as we kind of progress, talking about the journey. So how do we meet the customers where they're at or where they are? And this is something that when we first talk about, let's travel back in time a little bit. When this first came out, everybody was on-prem. You either had your own cloud, your private cloud, or using public cloud. And it was something that, as customers came out and said, hey, we need something different. We need to look at different ideas, different capabilities. Then this progressed to, well, we're going to link up to the cloud. Because I remember when I was first getting into cloud, and a lot of customers you were talking to is you're doing backup deployments to cloud. And so that's why you would go to hybrid cloud. And then it just gave you the capability of expanding or scaling or being able to render things without having to buy the equipment to render. So hybrid cloud kind of solves certain problems at the time and gives customers new advantages and capabilities. So you can be like, well, this 30 days, we're going to need a massive server deployment, but maybe we can scale that back. So it gives you a best of both worlds in some cases. And then you have cloud exchange, so multiple cloud platforms. This is something that you're going to have high speed, low latency, all of the front terms that really help to build out your environment. And then we get into this case where some customers are like, hey, we need a dedicated cloud. And what does that look like? And providing a cloud for a customer so that you don't have to actually manage the infrastructure. And that was something that you start looking at for customers that went from managing their own data centers to saying, well, we can have a cloud vendor manage our data center, and then we get all of the capabilities of cloud without having to worry about the infrastructure. And then you get into the idea of multi-cloud. And multi-cloud is just leveraging the best of all of the cloud platforms, what is the right product for what you're trying to do. Because there are products at each cloud that may be beneficial at the time. And this is something that we are going to focus on hybrid cloud and multi-cloud, but there are a couple other areas to kind of consider as we progress through this. But Jason, what are your other thoughts on this kind of journey, meeting customers where they're at?
Yeah, you know what I like about this slide is for those of us that have been doing cloud type work for a couple of years, and I saw from the one of the first polls we did here, there was actually quite a few people that are joining us today. And you've been in the cloud business for a while, right? You've done it for at least 2 years. Maybe you've done as many as 4 or 5 or 6. And as all these different approaches have come out in cloud, some of you have probably seen that these different approaches solve unique problems for the customers, right? And, Larry, as you were talking early on, it was, I've got 1 or 2 clouds. And from a network standpoint, some of my background, you had to do VPNs. You maybe started getting into express routes and fast connects, but it was really on you. And then came out the cloud exchange, and that solved the problem of, I don't want to manage this anymore. I don't want to have the operational overhead and the resiliency and the availability that I've got to work out. And Cloud Exchange took care of some of that networking problem for you, at least that like back half to the cloud. And then the customer started using multiple clouds, and we had the network problem of, well, I want to use multiple services, and I can use the Cloud Exchange, but I still got to do some routing and some firewall magic to pull that off, and I still got to monitor and still got a little bit of overhead. And where multi-cloud plays advantages, it gives us some more networking options to tackle more of that problem of, I don't want to manage this stuff, but I do want to consume the services. So this is what I like about this map is it kind of shows how all the cloud vendors have had to adjust their approaches and provide customers more choices so that you guys can get to what you really want is consuming the services, not having to manage all the infrastructure behind them.
Yeah, and one point that I kind of want to highlight from what you were saying there, Jason, is the networking. Because even with any of these solutions, the network complexity, even if it's managed by the cloud vendor, is still going to increase as you add other clouds, as you add on-prem, it's something that I've talked to enough customers that the minute you add a N+1 scenario, you start getting a little bit of network complexity to this situation. So it doesn't entirely rule it out, but it does help ease some of the scenarios and some of the pieces that people talk about. So Larry Ellison, this is a quote, and there is a YouTube video on this. So when you get the slide deck, you'll be able to take a look at this. So we've decided to make our best and greatest technology available in multi-clouds, and that gives customers choices. So this is something that I think is very crucial to talk about, is the fact that giving customers choices to deploy where they want, when they want, how they want. And it kind of goes to some of the ways that some of our tools as well. We use Terraform, we use Ansible, we use tools that are giving you the capability to deploy on multiple clouds, giving you tools that you don't have to basically learn a new skill set if you're trying to deploy on our cloud. So it's kind of a beneficial thing in this case. But Jason, I think when we were first talking about this, you had some thoughts on like this quote and how it really resonates with what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and it'll seep into some of our future slides, but the service offerings we're providing that are kind of backing this multi-cloud, there's a core tenet of we're trying to provide you this service so you have choices in the way that you use them and consume them. And I feel like that's one of our core tendencies of how we're going to provide you this experience with multi-cloud is we're going to try to keep in mind, we're always trying to provide you more choices on how to manage, consume, provision, and just use the services that we have.
Definitely. And one of our questions or Q&As that came up, and I think this is a good one to kind of start with as we progress through. So what cost model is there for multi-cloud, especially Oracle database for Azure? Does the customer need to pay Oracle directly? I'm going to start with it depends, because it depends on what service you're using on other cloud vendors, as to if you're paying Oracle for licensing, and then using that product there, or if you're doing one of the pre-baked deployments on that cloud vendor. And then in that case, you would be paying that cloud vendor. So this kind of gets into when we talk about express route or the interconnect, and kind of the cost there. But it really depends on what service you're using and if the licensing is included. And so you have to kind of look at the EULA, and the agreement for that particular product as to who, where you're sending your money or who you're paying at that time. Any other items to add on that one, Jason?
No, we've got a good slide on that one as well. Why don't we also, as we get to the ODSA slide, we'll come back to that and kind of touch upon the resources that go into that and which side of the cloud do they land on.
Yes. Yeah. And that's another good point for that. So common multi-cloud use cases, because this is something that, why do you need multi-cloud? It's not just a matter of someone saying, hey, we're doing multi-cloud. It's, there should be a reason as to why you're doing multi-cloud. It could be resiliency, for your workload. So making sure you have a workload failover or redundancy there, making sure that you have some mobility to your workload using tools like Kubernetes. And this is something that if you see on our platform, we have OKE, other platforms have Kubernetes. So it gives you a lot of capability to be able to have that workload resiliency and workload mobility. Cost optimization. This is something that when you look at different cloud vendors, it might be cheaper in certain cases for certain services. But it's a matter of, what are you looking at? What are you trying to deploy? And then you have split stack architecture. And this is something that kind of getting the best of breed again. This is maybe using Microsoft.NET on Azure and then using Oracle database on Oracle. So it just really depends as to what you're trying to deploy here. And Jason, like this is something that I can think of more than this, but I think these are definitely the common ones. When you're talking to customers, like what are the reasons for the split stack versus some of the other ones here?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes in the last couple of months or so, what I've seen customers, kind of lean into is definitely the best in breed, right? Customers, as they're trying to figure out what they want to migrate and build to the cloud, have to make decisions on where they're going to land that platform, that workload. And oftentimes you've already got preferences of what you want to use, right? You may have an app and web tier that's going to be basically based off like a .NET Windows type platform, but you also want to use the Oracle database for the resiliency and performance that it provides you. And years ago, that would have been hard to do with, traditional just public or private cloud. And some of the services we're going to talk about today make it a lot easier for you to take that same workload, split it across both cloud providers, get the best of what each of those provide in the way of both the services and features on that platform, as well as, cost optimization, right? Running Microsoft products in Azure probably has certain licensing advantage. And the same thing happens with Oracle products running on our platform, whether it's the Oracle database or Java workloads. There's a cost optimization component when you can run them on the provider's cloud platform. And that's been an active topic I've had a lot with customers as well, is how can I do this? How can I build this, but at the same time, keep an eye on my costs as I go?
Definitely. And I think one thing that I kind of saw in a question or Q&A there is, where do you manage these services? When you're going multi-cloud, which console do you log into? Can I get one console to rule them all, so to speak? And that is something that you're going to be logging into the console in which you deploy that particular service. So you may be logging into OCI for database. You may be logging into Azure for the .NET web server. I have seen tools out there that kind of overlay, but I don't know of a specific one that kind of gives you a full overlay of all the cloud vendors to go into one console. But any items on that, Jason? Because I know, there's API calls for all of this stuff, so it's something that you can kind of deploy using the API calls. But aside from that, you kind of have to go into the console.
Yeah, I've seen two things on that, right? And all the cloud vendors are taking their individual tool sets and consolidating them into single panes of glass. I could point to our whether it's Cloud Advisor or Cloud Guard, we're taking, say, all the security toolage and putting them under Cloud Guard to have a single pane of glass of the OCI security tools and an OCI single pane of glass. But I'm also seeing some collaboration between Azure and OCI to what you were saying earlier of, can I take some of the APIs, some of the telemetrics about how a database is running and run them over to App Insights or the logging and analytics tools on Azure? And that's starting to happen now, where we're starting to build those integrations where we can feed data to each other's observability and monitoring platforms. So you can at least get a single pane of glass on, is my service up, down? Am I performing well? Where are all my logs if I need to do some sort of security analysis on who's been performing certain actions? Those activities are starting to become more and more frequent across the, especially Azure and OCI platforms.
Yeah, definitely. All righty. So we do have a couple questions, but I want to we'll get back to these couple questions as we kind of progress through. So thank you for dropping those in the Q&A. But customer challenge. So how do we connect different components spread across multiple clouds and reduce operation overhead of managing the network infrastructure? We all know networking is simplistically complex. It's something that when we talk about setting up VPN tunnels, I remember my first IPsec VPN tunnel. It was fun, but you also have some potential limitations to bandwidth capabilities. You also have how do I make sure that's redundant? How do I get performance? There's a lot of different considerations when you start looking at how you're setting up your networking and what does that look like for multi-cloud deployment. In some cases, you may still have to use an IPsec tunnel depending on the cloud vendor, or you're using maybe one of our partners that has the capability of building out a dedicated connection. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But I think the main one we're going to focus on is the Azure interconnect for this piece. So this gives you high speed, low latency connection. And this is something that's going to be using Fast Connect and I always think of Espresso Route, but Azure is Express Route. Apparently I should drink more coffee. But you have a couple things that have to be deployed here. And so we have our dynamic routing gateway that's going to be deployed on the Oracle side. You have your virtual network gateway that's deployed on the Azure side. And this is something that you can also connect back to on-prem. So you can have your interconnect for these, and then you can have your Fast Connect to on-prem. You can have an Express Route to Azure. So there's a lot of different combinations and deployments for redundancy, high availability. And then it comes down to a little bit of where are you paying for these things? So that's something that you do have to consider. But Jason, this I've seen a little bit more common when customers are using Azure, that they're setting up an interconnect. What are your thoughts on this particular one?
Yeah, right. As I'm looking back at one of the polls we took here earlier with the audience we have 52% of you are in Azure, 78% of you are in OCI. Right. And there's probably amongst that same crowd, a few of you using interconnect for some of the use cases we're talking about today. But I also challenge the same crowd is, what other things can you use the interconnect for? And, one of the things that caught me, by surprise by one of the customers was they weren't looking at split cloud. They weren't looking at, best in breed. They're looking at how to deduplicate some of their infrastructure. I'm talking infrastructure like whether it's Active Directory, maybe it's your management consoles for antivirus, maybe it's your vulnerability scanning analysis using Palo Alto's Prisma or something like that. And instead of deploying those, in OCI and Azure and AWS and one of the customers looked at, can I deploy the infrastructure stack in one place and then provide strong network connectivity without incurring a lot of networking ingress charges, right? I want to be able to scan multiple clouds, but I don't want to pay for the data for all my scanning and infrastructure tools. And what they did was they deployed it on one of the cloud platforms and used interconnect to be able to connect them to OCI to manage, scan, and provide that observability to their environment. And that was an interesting use case that was, kind of non-typical from the traditional split your database and app workloads, giving them some simplification and all the infrastructure to manage and a little bit of cost optimization as well, and that they didn't have to pay for data ingress and egress charges and for that compute and storage behind those servers running those applications.
Yeah. And one of the things for the cost on this one, you are paying OCI side and you're paying Azure. So this is something that it's not a click on one side and then you're paying just that vendor. It's a click and deploy connection, and then you're basically paying Azure and OCI. So there's some pieces to consider as you set this up. One of the questions that kind of came up, how does one manage FinOps in multi-cloud scenario? And I don't know that we specifically have a slide on this one, but just kind of I see a lot of customers basically exporting their costs into other tools to kind of look at what their overall cost is for that particular platform. Jason, are you aware of any specific tool that can look at the cost in each one of these? I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Yeah, there is. You have to give me a second as we're going through today's presentation. There's actually a marketplace offering that we have that allows you to import the costing information for OCI as well as other tools, or other platforms. But you're right on. What a lot of customers end up doing is they'll have third-party software where when they need to do the deeper analysis, they'll download, whether it's a CSV or some sort of, type file out of each platform, and then do that outside the tool where it's, more complex analysis. If it's simple analysis, right? I want to know what I'm, costing out this month. I want to know about a particular service or compartment. Most of the customers I work with just use the cloud native tools, and they really reserve the third-party tools if they need to do deeper analysis across multiple clouds is what I see commonly. But I do believe we've got a marketplace offering. Let me see if I can find it as we're kind of talking through here today, and I'll put it in the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you for that one. And then we got another one here. So if I'm connecting Azure, it must be under the same organization name, or can I connect to client Azure? So if you're trying to do an interconnect, you can connect to, it doesn't have to be the same organization name, but it's something that you have to have permissions on both sides. So this is something that you have to have the tokens, everything from both sides, and the authorization to actually be able to configure this. This would be the same as if you're trying to do a region to region peering for just OCI, or if you're trying to do a tenancy to tenancy on OCI, you have to have access and permissions on both sides and the policies in place to allow you to basically deploy this. So it's just a matter of, you can set this up. I would take a look at the documentation on what's required from Azure side and what's required. And we do have a link in our slide here that will be sent out for what is required on the Oracle side. But basically, you have to have, policies to set up your DRG, policy to, allow you to create the Fast Connect, and that you would have to have a similar policy for creating your VNG or your virtual network gateway or your Azure Express route. So this is something that, it's definitely possible, because you might acquire a company again, like we were talking about, and that was one of the reasons why you might be going multi-cloud and you need to connect up that company. And I've worked with customers that are doing that scenario where they have Oracle Cloud, and then, they're setting up, they're connecting to another cloud vendor because that subsidiary that customer that they purchased has that other cloud vendor. So it can be done. It may take a little bit of time, making sure you have the proper permissions in the account. Jason, any other items I missed on that one? I think it's basically policies and access is the main ones.
Right. No, you covered it well.
Yeah. So that gets us into a map. Where are we at, and how can we meet you where we're at? But I think Jason, you had some good thoughts on the map. I think the biggest thing to notice here is we're at a lot of locations. But I'm gonna pass it off to you on this one, Jason.
Yeah, I think this kind of comes back to, this multi-cloud journey is just not something we started this year, right? We started this partnership with Microsoft in 2019 with, our first couple of interconnects here in the US. And as Microsoft and Oracle continues to deploy out additional data centers around the world, what you're going to see is more interconnects, right? This is not a service that is going to go away. This is not a service that's just going to be available in one region. This will be a service that will continue kind of demonstrate our partnership and our commitment that as we build out our global locations together, we're going to have interconnects together, and we're going to hope to provide enough of these that wherever you want to host your workloads, that there'll be locations close enough in that region that you can use interconnects in that same geolocation as well.
So Oracle Cloud is available globally from 41 cloud regions. So this is something that, like Jason was saying, it's expanding. Since I've been here, it's been expanding a lot. Where do we have one? Yeah, we have a cloud region in Mumbai. We have an interconnect, closest interconnect to that. So the question I see here, is there a roadmap for Azure interconnect region in India? I am not sure on that. That would definitely be something that we'd have to look into. But as you see on the map, we do have a close one. We have Singapore has an interconnect, and Seoul, Tokyo, Johannesburg. So, I mean, the closest one would be Singapore, but if you're talking about like a data requirement where you have to be in India, we'd have to look into that. So I'm not sure off the top of my head for that particular roadmap question. Alrighty. So why use Oracle Interconnect for Azure? That's a good question. What are the other options? Well, I mean, there is setting up a VPN tunnel like we talked about. But really the biggest three, this gives you choices to combine, best of breed again, for two cloud vendors, looking at cost optimization. So if you look at most cloud vendors, I'm not 100% sure on the Azure side how they do this particular cost piece. But for like egress charges, this is something that, when you actually look at doing an Azure interconnect, if you're going between OCI and Azure, you're not going to have egress charges from OCI side out the interconnect. So this is something that can help reduce costs from that standpoint if you're using those two cloud vendors. Jason, what are some other things that we're going to think about as we set up an interconnect? Why would we want to use it?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one, and from my standpoint, is when you have those workloads that require that high bandwidth, low latency, right? We talked about web and database being split. I could also see the same thing for data warehouses, where the data warehouse gets set on one side, analytics gets split on the other. It's really going to come down to, I need that direct, private, secure connectivity. I need high speed, low latency, and that's going to unlock a lot of services we can talk about, as well as a lot of designs you may consider to use services from both sides of the house.
And one question that kind of popped up about this. So how do we go about choosing where we place an Azure interconnect?
That's a good one.
That is. I was trying to think through that one, and I kind of want to go back to the map here. My thoughts, and then Jason, if you want to chime in as we're going through this. But my biggest thought is, one, does that region have an Azure interconnect? Would be the first thing. Is where are you trying to connect to? I think aside from that, it's what is the closest region to what you're trying to connect to would be the biggest thing. But what are your thoughts on that one, Jason?
Now, look at it from this standpoint. More likely, you've picked in your cloud regions a site that's production, maybe one that's DR, and maybe you've mixed them where you can go, kind of go across the map on, if there's a failover, I can move the workload to the other one. But you've got a lot of cases of primary and secondary location for your workloads. You should absolutely have interconnects in your primary location. If you've got one of the solutions we've talked about that need to go across both clouds, right? I've got a .NET web server and an Oracle database, right? You should have an interconnect there. But you could also consider putting that same interconnect in your DR site or your secondary region as well. And that supports the obvious. If I need to fail over from east to west, whichever ones you're using for Azure and OCI, Do you want to make sure that you have the interconnects already spun up in your secondary location so you can reduce your RTO and RPO and how quickly you can recover from a serious outage? Or maybe you just want to be able to recover for something that's taking you down for a couple hours. So I generally recommend to customers of definitely in your production or primary sites, consider using interconnect if you've got a workload that needs it, but also look at your secondary sites or your DR sites and talk about what your plans are for recovery or scale out. And do you need to also have an interconnect there as well?
Yeah, all good points there. And another question that popped up, and then we'll kind of progress forward. So an org is using OAC in OCI and AD on Azure in Ashburn. Does this automatically use the interconnect, or do we need to specifically ask for the interconnect? This would be something that if you already have an interconnect established, then it would be a matter of the routing for these, because Azure AD is something that may be using some external endpoints for their side. So it's a matter of you'd have to take a look at the routing for the traffic for what's happening on those. I don't know, Jason, if you've seen this particular setup before.
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
Commonly for that, you're probably just relying on public API endpoints locked down so that the calls are only going to your tenancy and your subscription. The only place I could see, in that scenario using the interconnect is if you've got some sort of service that's running on a server or something that you suspect is running on your network, or what your network looks like in the cloud, whether that's a VNet in Azure or a VCN in OCI. When you start getting into those kinds of discussions of, I know I'm running something in my cloud on my IP space, then yeah, you're probably getting into scenarios where you want to consider an interconnect. If you're more talking about, I'm using a SaaS service or a PaaS service, right? Something like OAC, and even parts of Azure AD, some of that traffic may just be going over public API endpoints, and you might not have an interconnect at all, or a use case to absolutely have one, because there's not a lot of high bandwidth, high latency or low latency requirements on that kind of traffic.
Jason, for that one. All right. So next one, we get into next customer challenge. So managing workloads and data across multiple cloud platforms has become increasingly difficult. This stems from a shortage of cloud platform expertise and a lack of multi-platform tools. And this kind of gets us into Oracle Database Service for Azure. So Jason, what's this going to help us with? I mean, it's a big thing about leveraging best of breed, but this adds some complexity, but also solves some of that complexity just by what it's doing for us.
Absolutely. On that last slide, I'd sum that up as it's the old adage of there's too much work to do and not enough people to do it. And that's absolutely true when we start looking at our cloud resources, your cloud engineers, your cloud architects, your TPMs. There's always more work than we have people. And a lot of times the folks that you have are in high demand and they've already built up some skill sets, say on Azure, right? Maybe you've got some Azure database admins. They've been working there for a while on SQL. They know the platform well. They know how to provision. They know how to troubleshoot. But now you've got this requirement that one of your customers wants to use the Oracle database, right? And it would be nice if we could provide those same database folks time to learn OCI and get familiar with how to deploy things. But we also recognize that's not always, reality, that, some of your, highly, utilized resources don't have time to come deep in another platform. So services like ODSA is, one of those multi-cloud attempts of us taking our, best service that we're well known for, the Oracle database, and providing it in a way that you can consume it, provision it, all from Azure. So your Azure experts can now deploy an Oracle database. They can do those typical provisioning and configuration activities all from the Azure console, all from the existing scripts that work with Azure without ever having to log into OCI. And in response, they can get database metrics and events fed into tools that they may be familiar with, like Azure Insights and Azure Log Analytics. And of course, get to that end business result that, that we're asked to do is, how do I do database queries from some sort of application on the Azure side to a database on the OCI side? And to me, this is how we solve that problem of there's not enough of you to go around, and you don't have enough time to be experts in all the platform overnight. And so how do we make your job just a little bit easier if you're already an expert on one side of the platform like Azure?
Yeah, it definitely helps with that training side of it, and having the right resources on hand. I mean, it's a big thing, because when you start getting multiple clouds in your brain, it gets very complex very quickly. Then you're messing up acronyms of RDS or the virtual network acronyms. So it's something that this is going to definitely make things a lot easier. The other one that kind of makes things easier is Oracle MySQL HeatWave on AWS. So this is something that you can deploy. So it's the only service that combines OLTP, analytics, machine learning, and machine learning based automation with a single MySQL database. So this is something that can be deployed in multiple locations to kind of help with this scenario as well for multi-cloud. But this kind of leads into, what's next? What's next for multi-cloud? And I think we kind of discussed a little question about this. And Anand, you were kind of talking about this earlier. So what do you want to bring up about what's next in multi-cloud?
Thank you, Larry. I think both of you have been talking so lively about the multi-cloud capabilities, customer requirements, and everything. From my personal know-how, it's been said that multi-cloud is going to be the strategy most customers will adopt it in next 3 to 5 years, from an industry-leading analyst, including Gartner. How is Oracle preparing its customers for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we've talked about today is, the interconnect, bridging the network gap between OCI and Azure. We've talked about new services, making your life a little bit easier, knowing that there's not enough of you and there's a lot that has to get done every day. So how do we make it so we've lowered the bar to entry, but also make it so you can use best of breed easier? We're going to continue leaning into that, right? If you watch the roadmap from OCI later this year, you're going to see more network connectivity options like we've done with the OCI to Azure interconnect, right? You're going to see more of that, where it provides the foundation for us to launch even more services on top of that backbone, so that APIs can talk across both clouds. You can have some of that single pane of glass that starts to be developed between the clouds, but you can also get that fast data transfer and low latency, like you see with the OCI to Azure interconnect. So foundationally, more that's coming. We are committed to that, just like the partnership we have with Microsoft. More will be coming on that front. Second thing is new innovations. We strongly believe that when you can use best of breed, and again, I'll go back to the analogy of maybe you like .NET, maybe you like Power BI, and you want to use the Oracle database and some other services. When we're able to make it easy for you to put those together, whether it's a networking challenge, an authentication challenge, or the APIs, when we make that easier for you, I think it shifts more time to be focused on innovation. Less time on undifferentiated infrastructure lifting and more time on how to do things that are interesting, that drives the innovation for your company. And of course, along the way, with all these services, we're trying to reduce the overhead, right? The value is not in setting up a network or building a pipeline. The value is what you guys get out of these services when you're able to put them together.
Thank you, Jason.
I got nothing to add. That was hitting the nail on the head for multi-cloud and where we're headed. So I think real quick, there's Oracle account teams, there's cloud lift services, there's architectures that you can grab for multi-cloud architectures. But this talk was supposed to be about multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. So we're going to go ahead and jump over to the hybrid cloud portion, or hybrid and edge use case portion of this. So customers have connected and disconnected systems. They want the value of remote management with the reliability and control of having your own hardware. They want all the functionality of cloud in your data center with no compromise. So this is something that hybrid cloud is another crucial component, another design idea, another thought. And are you going to be using hybrid and multi-cloud deployments? Most likely. And you see it happen all the time. It's just a matter of when, why you're using it, what services that you're using. And this is getting into some of our hybrid and edge use cases. And so by defining this, you have the hybrid cloud term that's out there, and then you have edge services or edge use cases for different deployments, different tools, different softwares, different capabilities that you can actually deploy on-prem, in your data center, however this needs to be deployed. So modernize on-premises infrastructure apps is one of them. Build and standardize operating environments, latency and performance. So this is something that, depending on what you're deploying, this again is the latency and performance piece, because no one has solved the physics side of this to where we can actually have items miles and miles away and still have the same latency as if it was right there in front of you. So control data and app location and access. So hybrid architecture enables organizations to help with this. So this is something that these 4 use cases kind of help with this and kind of define if it's on-prem. Maybe you're using hybrid, so you have your own location, and using edge services. And so we'll kind of talk through the progression. So this is going back to, how is Oracle helping out with this? Over the years, we've had different tools, different hardwares. And as we've progressed, we've started to merge these together. So we have, Oracle launches Exa Cloud at Customer. So this is something where you can actually deploy a Exadata on-prem, but this is something that we also launched dedicated regions Cloud at Customer. So these 2 things kind of help with this edge service and getting these tools closer to where you need them. And that is these 4 services here. So there's more than just those 2 that we have that kind of help this scenario. So as we kind of talk about Exa Cloud at Customer, OCI dedicated regions, OCVS, so Oracle Cloud VMware Solutions, and public and gov cloud regions. This is something that you can deploy where you need to, connect where you need to. Now, it might be dependent on if you're using the interconnect, or if you're having to use a VPN, or if you're connecting in another way. But all of these different tools will kind of help deploy that. And the first one, diving into a little bit more, is Exadata Cloud at Customer. So you're actually going through the invoking Cloud UI or REST API calls, but you do have a local control plane. You do have, a deployment in your own data center. And this is something that you can still have this linked up to Oracle's public cloud when it's deployed. So this is one solution or one capability. Now, can you do, Exadata in the cloud? Yes, you can. We have a way to deploy that. But in some use cases, this would be a scenario for doing hybrid or edge. And this would kind of qualify under the edge deployment of having one of our services deployed there. The next one is OCI dedicated region. And this is something that there is a little bit of bar to entry, but this is something that, you have an Oracle managed cloud rack. So something that we walk in there with forklift and we deploy a full setup of Oracle Cloud in your environment, essentially. And this is your data center, but this is all of us managing, basic Oracle managed, fully managed by OCI, in your data center, and then you're paying for what you use. There is certain commitments for this. It's definitely something you'd have to talk to your account team about setting this up or what it looks like in that scenario. But this is us racking and stacking, us managing it, and then you have the same API calls as if you would be using our cloud. The next one is OCVS. And this one, Jason, I know you're going to hit this one out of the park, but this one, VMware Solutions is another great way to kind of link things up. So I'm going to pass this over to you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the popular use cases I've seen lately when it comes to lift and shift is, I've got the cost driver that I'm trying to get out of my existing data center today so I can shut it down, right? That's a savings in power, cooling, physical security, smart hands to take care of the management of equipment. And I'm trying to do it quickly. So I don't want to do a lot of modernization. I want to pick it up, move it to the cloud, and I want to move it as is, right? And OCVS is probably, out of all the cloud vendors, the one that is closest to how you're managing your VMware environment today, right? You've got an investment in people, you've got investment in VMware tools, things like NSX and vSAN, and our solution lets you bring all of that and continue managing it with full admin access with local, root access to your servers. And it provides a nice, landing pad that if you want to do a lift and shift and you want to extend the value of your VMware solution stack, you can use it on our platform with minimal change. And if you could flip to one slide for me, Larry. The second part I like about OCVS is one of the challenges that would come with moving any workload is some of your workloads don't respond well to re-IPing them. Maybe they're a legacy workload. Maybe they don't rely completely on DNS, or you suspect maybe something was done at a network layer, firewall layer, that it's IP based. Using tools like NSXT and HCX, you can not only seamlessly migrate your workloads, think like a vMotion, or if you want to do a bulk migration, HCX is strongly supports that seamless migration over. But at a layer 2 level, you can also extend your existing IP addresses from on-premise to the cloud. Now, if you think about that, right now we've made it so, one, you've got a place where you can land your VMware workloads with minimal amount of changes for the way you want to migrate or manage your environment. You can bring all your tools, and the impact to your customers is very minimal, right? We can vMotion them over. You can keep your IP address, and that environment will look pretty much the same way it did when it was running on premise. So this is a great approach that if you want to move fast and you want to move your existing VMware workload, I think our solution, lines up very, very well to provide a quick and easy migration into the cloud.
Yeah, it definitely does. All righty. Well, this kind of brings us to this the future state of everybody's cloud. Your data center, cloud at customer, public cloud, roving edge, POP, CDNs, dedicated region. There's lots of different deployment options. It's a matter of what is right for what you're trying to build. Which cloud do you go to for the particular product or deployment you're trying to do? And there's lots of different cases for this. There's backup options. So maybe having your items backed up to multiple clouds in case you need to fail over. There's going back to those RTO and RPO, and going back to where, locality of that particular region, what's the latency like? All of these things kind of factor into where am I deploying? Why am I deploying to this cloud vendor? Cost optimization, and really hammering and getting back into why are we doing this? Why are we doing this for multi-cloud, and why are we doing this for hybrid cloud? And that's something that is one, it's a business case. It's is your business looking at doing this? Is this a requirement for your business? At a certain point, it potentially will be. And like we talked about, it's not a question of if, but maybe when you're actually deploying. Is this a one size fits all? No. This is definitely not a one size fits all. This is a, bits and pieces, and there are reasons to deploying in multiple locations and using some of the services from other vendors. Jason, any final thoughts you want to add to this?
No, I like this. It's this kind of cartoony graphics. I think it does kind of show where we're all headed, right? You're going to have a myriad of solutions you're going to implement. And Oracle is going to be there with, other, cloud platforms to try to put this all together for you, give you choices, make this easier, make it so you can do best in breed without having to do a lot of complicated networking or API or federation. I really think this is where the future's at as we look down the next couple of years, is customers are going to be able to shamelessly use whatever they want across the clouds, and it's going to become easier and easier to get there.
Yep, definitely. All righty. If you want to know more, we have some links. These links will be in the slide deck, and these are great for multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, Azure Interconnect, A lot of the stuff that we talked about will be in here. So, grab those links once we send out the slide deck, take a look at this, dive into it further. But I just want to, Jason, thanks for talking with me today on this. I think it's a crucial topic for everybody to kind of dive into. But before you go, I want to hand it back to Renu, and I think we also potentially have a final poll, if I remember right, before you all run away.
Thank you so much, Jason and Larry and Anand and Lynn, for this great session. Love the discussions on multi-cloud and hybrid cloud here. So there is a poll on the screen. If you would please take a moment to answer this poll. Your feedback is really important to us, and we look forward to looking at your feedback to improve our sessions. So on a scale of 1 to 10, let us know where 10 is great and 1 is really bad. I hope it was not that bad. So let us know. And again, remember, your feedback is important for us. So I'll give another few moments for everyone to respond to this. And if you have questions that were not answered, or after the session, if you think that there were some more questions that you had for us, I'm going to put email alias here in chat. Please grab that. You can post your questions here, and our experts will be more than happy to look at your questions and answer those questions. And now it's time for one more poll. So if you would take a moment to let us know what kind of topics you would like us to cover in the upcoming sessions. Do we have that? Oh yeah, if you scroll down, you'll see the second question also there. Yes. So select the topics you're most interested in, so we can add sessions on those topics. And we have our next session on June 6th, which is the topic for that session will be security. You can find the details of all our upcoming sessions. I'm going to put the link again in chat. You can go here and sign up for the other upcoming sessions. We are also going to add hands-on sessions. And we did 3 sessions so far. We are going to add a couple more hands-on sessions. So just bookmark this page that I shared just now, and you'll see when we add new sessions. There will be another one in June, second week of June. So you can register for those as well. With that, I would like to thank all of you for joining us. And I hope we see you all next time for a security session, or the one which there will be a database session after that. So enjoy these sessions, enjoy the recordings, and have a great day, everyone. Thanks again, Larry, Jason, Len, and Anand for joining us.
Thank you, Renu.